Hey there, brothers. I am excited to have Chris come join me, and I want to share that Chris and I, we met at a Robert Masters men's intensive on Oahu, and we broed out immediately. And Chris is from Australia and recently moved to Maui, and it's been so awesome to have another incredible man in my life who's doing relationship work and coaching, and most excitingly is shadow work. So I brought Chris on to bring him in to talk about shadow work and our own experiences of that and what works for us in it. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, yeah. Chris, could you just share the men a little bit? You know, a few of you men probably know Chris already, but just share a little bit like, what are you up to? What's your passion around your current work right now?
Where do I start? Moving to Maui has been one of the biggest changes in my life, really. I mean, the whole migration process really gave me so much more gratitude to my parents for their courage in picking up and actually making quite a big transformational thing around taking themselves out of China and Hong Kong and coming to Australia. For me right now, I'm filling out with my beloved Marilyn what we want to flow with, feeling out Maui, feeling out the big changes in our life as well. I used to work in corporate. I spent 15 years in finance sort of sectors, in senior roles in the financial sectors in Australia. And once I started to do that deep dive into the shadowy bits of the conditioning from my parents in terms of financial stability, how that was locked in with all the shame and this, pride actually about needing to hold some kind of, position in society, having money at the forefront, having a house, this stability at the forefront of everything that I thought were my passions. When I began to deep dive into this space, I started to realize that that whole corporate scene was just not for me. And that's when I really had to take the courage to take a step back from that and pause and sort of hibernate on it, to come to a place now where I'm so much more open to all of the opportunities and the passions that I've been sort of cultivating on the side of my full-time work, where it's been music and sound journeys. It's been coaching men, training men and women to help them through their conditioning and their shadowy bits as well. Couples has been a really, really inspiring thing for Marilyn and I to do as well, to work on those elements, both for ourselves in our relationship with each other, but also in helping other couples to come to that space where they can have this safety to share the exploration of that deep dive into their shadows without the shame, without the or if there is shame, to be able to call that out, to have a space to call that out. If there is disgust, to be able to bring that to the surface and share that. All of it with heart. With heart. And so, we've been feeling out what we want to offer, because there's so much, depth and breadth of work that we want to share with the world. We're just filling out sort of like what areas we want to narrow and hone into. And for us, I think at the moment it's heading more into the relationship space, because really the transformative, all of this work, all of the courage that and all of the energy and all of the investment that we have in coming to a more embodied space and a more awareness of the shadowy behaviors and that changing. The fruit, if you like, is the relational element, is the deeper relationship with not just ourselves, but with a lover, someone who a peer, and it is that beauty, that is the fruit, that is like tasting the fruit at the end of the journey. And that's just a continually evolving process. It's just delicious, so delicious. And that's what we sense is like where we would like to come to. There are so many steps on the way. And it can come from so many different paths and walks in life, because our shadow has been built in so many different layers.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for giving us and what I'm also hearing for you is that you had some strong conditioning you came in with, and you pursued the certain kind of job and work and lifestyle, and yet we're overriding a certain deeper truth in you. Absolutely. And when you started doing work on yourself and exploring and going into the depths of your being, you started to discover that you weren't really in alignment with the work you were doing, and it was motivated more by family lineage, pleasing family, social structures, what fits in, rather than your own authentic knowing. And what's happening from there, hearing you and knowing you a bit, is that you've been kind of in a deep discovery of your truth and who you are. And that's been a lot of shadow work, right? Going in, purging out stuff, looking at it, getting more radically honest. And now I'm hearing that what you've become passionate out of that work is in the fruit of relationship, and that how beautiful it is when we've done our work and we're available for a quality of love and connection experience that you're speaking to, that is so enriching and fulfilling and beautiful and not easy necessarily, right? But at the same time, it's rich, and I'm appreciating it. And also hear you speaking a lot as us. As you speak of Marilyn, I'm really hearing that your bond is so strong with Marilyn that you speak as an us, what we're co-creating, which is really unique to actually hear for me. I appreciate it.
There is the us, but it's also important to recognize the individuality in it as well, so that we're not fusing, but that we all have our own intentions and visions and set that for ourselves. But we also create this vision as a couple, what we want to share. And they don't necessarily have to be the same as our individual visions, but just to recognize that space.
Beautiful. I really agree. There's this dance between enough autonomy and connection to our strong inner impulses, and then the ways that those circles overlay, right? Where there is the shared resonance or the shared passion and vision, and they aren't always the same, but yet there's enough of it that weaves together to co-create for us to have enough individuality and time to ourselves and passion to ourselves, and enough shared collaboration, resonance, love. I'd love to hear from you, more of your experience, if you're willing, of some of the key pieces you've done in shadow work in yourself, or that you really value, or even that you support men through.
For me, one of the most important elements that really is this what I called heart-centeredness. Being able to come to this point that we live from here, we live out these experiences from here. And because the thing is, if we are unable to live from the heart, it's very difficult to accept and to embrace and to love some of our more shadowy elements. With tenderness, with empathy, because there are things that we have done and others have done to us, and the collective has done to each other, that if we are to truly find a space where we want to change underlying behaviors about that, we need to bring forgiveness to that. We need to bring acceptance, and acceptance is always the first part to actually being able to forgive. If we cannot grasp that something has happened, or that we have done something, or hurtful thing, then we could say the words, I forgive, I love, I love.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not actually getting to
Mm-hmm.
that place. And we need to bring this first and foremost to ourselves and to everything. That's a very, very critical piece. And I know a lot of men and women who, myself included, went into this space, but then for me, I allowed this space to be some type of mechanism to what I call spiritually bypass some of the emotional unprocessed shadow of my inner child conditioning. That for me, meditation became a crutch to lean on. Having unpleasant conversations with people, whether it was at work or with my family or with my ex-partners, it was this, I would escape here into a state of bliss. And I was feeling at bliss, but nobody else was. In fact, everybody else was so super angry and triggered by the fact that I would escape here. I was like, there's nothing wrong. I'm changing the story. I'm seeing the perspective differently. And I'm just staying here in my blissful space. There is a certain type of loneliness that happens here. But it doesn't allow for a depth of relationship. If I was to be really honest with myself, that was what I was still really struggling with was in my relationships with both my family, with my mum and my dad. And it was something I would struggle with deeply with my partners. Mm-hmm. What this didn't allow me to do was to sit with the unprocessed grief. Yeah. The unprocessed shame and pride that was locked in by my conditioning, the unprocessed disgust, judgment, and unprocessed anger and fire. It allowed me instead, this whole thing was to continue to shame anger, to say, no, I'm not angry, and continue to be numb to anger, which did not cultivate any kind of me following my path. And it wasn't until, and I was very happy being in this space all the time. So happy being in a state of bliss all the time. And I thought this is the way. I thought this is definitely the way. But it wasn't until I had an ex-girlfriend whose stepmom was running psychotherapy type sessions and doing work with Robert Augustus Masters. And that was when I began. I said, okay, yeah, I get. And she said to me, I see you as a big spiritual bypass. I'm like, what is spiritual bypass? That was one of my first things. What is that? And that was when I began this deeper dive into the emotional element, into the inner shadow of the emotional element. And it wasn't until I really deep dived into that emotional part that I started to realize how much work I hadn't done. Yet now I could do it with heart. And it enabled for such a fast transition, not transition, but processing of the trauma of childhood, to allow acceptance, not an excuse to my parents or whoever else it was that had done me any harm in the past, but an acceptance that the trauma had happened to me and that I had happened to it, and an acceptance and a bringing to heart of that, a real forgiveness of all of that enables that really fast. It's like this wave of a flooding of what's unpleasant emotions, and some might term it as suffering, but it's not suffering. It's just this wave, and that same wave kind of is a revelation, but it's seen as this, it's like a waterfall being cleansed. You're walking through this waterfall. There's a lot of fear. It's like you sort of, oh, is this going to put me under? And you make that journey. You take the courage to swim through the waterfall, and you're on the other side. You're just like, oh, wow. Which then also that deep dive into the sensual and sexual traumas that we have, the conditioning around this. In my case, my parents, anytime there would be any kissing or a physical like a physical embrace on television, my parents would turn the television.
Wow. So there was a lot of messaging that like, that's not okay. Don't do that.
Messaging around that.
Chris, this is brilliant, and I want to pause you because you just shared so much, and you eloquently and quite beautifully just shared your own maturation process from, the sense of learning meditation and opening and doing your deep work and valuing the state you are in, but not necessarily valuing the relational experiences with others and being a little bit self-absorbed in that.
Yes.
And I really like you naming that so beautifully and realizing that actually that wasn't a holistic way. It was a step along the path.
Yes.
And I often call it checking out rather than checking in. And we can do that in a lot of ways, whether we're a big time athlete and we're going rock climbing or doing killer workouts with our bodies. We have this thing where we can use that as a consistent way of checking out and kind of avoiding some of the conflicts, confrontations, issues, stresses of our life versus what you're saying. You said waterfall, but I actually like to think of it as a fire as well. It's like sitting close to a fire and adding wood to it and like getting hot and getting uncomfortable a little bit and how to take a layer off and then getting cool as you move away from the fire, having to come closer again, and this dance with staying in the heat and learning how to be in that heat more intensively. Or like you said, getting pounded by the waterfall for a while and getting pushed under, staying with that and popping out on the other side. All in all, I really appreciate, because your description, it speaks the hero's journey in quite a beautiful way, because you've gone through this deep journey and then you had some angel come in and say, hey, I think you're spiritual bypassing. I see you.
Yes.
With love, it sounds like, and with encouragement and support rather than making you wrong. She was more like, I want to point you to some deeper work, which is really a blessing when we get that in our lives.
Yes.
And you've done that work, and now you've been doing that work and you're deepening in it more and more. And you're also called to step more and more into leadership and sharing it and teaching it, which I just want to highlight as a natural progression for most of us. As we do our deeper work, as we heal, as we take greater responsibility, and as we start generating higher quality relationships, overall a more expansive and enriched experience, we naturally gravitate towards wanting to support others to have it, because we start seeing where people are spiritual bypassing or checking out rather than checking in, and we can find loving ways to give feedback.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Yeah. It's beautiful, Chris. And what I think, and you probably agree with this, is that you naturally start taking on a leadership role in your life.
Yes.
Not leadership over others, however, the one that comes from living in more totality and responsibility is that you respond more to what you see, and you have a bigger intention to support and to show up and to be real. And sometimes that means be sharp. And sometimes that means be soft and from the heart, right?
Yeah, there's an art to it. I call it relational artistry, but we can't find that art until we have to go through that. We are finding all different types of ways to help people navigate that. But the leadership, that type of leadership, is what I call almost like this responsibility that we when we come into this space have to share the message, not push the message, just share it. And it's sharing of a journey. And the best way that I've experienced others teaching me has been not in a pushy way, but in a way that has been, I'm sharing my journey. If you're called to walk on that journey, join. If you're not, no problems. And it stops becoming, say, activism. there might be a lot of plant-based activism or environmental activism, and it's like another way, another crutch for us to express disgust, express shame, and express judgment, stuff we've trapped in. And so it is a way, though, because we see all of these different types of people who have that that conditioning and that trauma that has guided them to certain coping mechanisms to behave in a certain way, because that's how they've created safety for themselves. To be able to call it out if that's welcomed in a way that doesn't re-traumatize, in a way that doesn't antagonize, in a way that respects the edge and respects that resistance is also okay, and just to sit with that resistance is sometimes just what's needed as well.
Well said, Chris. There's a few things that I want to highlight. One of them is I want to go into a little deeper is what you're speaking of is disgust, because a lot of us I don't think are really tuned to that. However, I'm with you in the sense that resistance actually is a good sign, because resistance is a first layer of defense that's protecting something we don't want to feel or really look at, that's been protected, guarded, pushed down inside of us, whether consciously or unconsciously. And we know that something's starting to be initiated when there is heat or resistance or discomfort or squirming or different things where it's like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't like this. This isn't. And you and I both know from being in a really incredible container with a powerful teacher that they narrow right in on and go like, what's happening to you right now? And actually bring the fire right in front of you, and that's what we need as far as men's work. And I appreciate your awareness too of, we're here to lovingly invite one another. And sometimes love comes as a sharp hand or as a direct, like, hey, what's this? But the old paradigm of masculinity has been that we would do that with an air of like, you're not good enough, or there's something wrong with you, or like, when are you going to finally get together and do your work? Because I've been doing it, right? That's dying, because we're more like, we all are on the path. And how do we do this, that I'm your ally in seeing what you don't see? And, one of my definitions of shadow work that I've come to understand is it's what I don't know that I don't know. And I'm only going to discover what my shadow is with the reflection and experience of the world or of a relationship or of a man or of a teacher. I won't discover that on my own, because there's too much that's been well protected to not see or feel it. So if you're willing to share a little bit more of your understanding or experience of the disgust part, because I think that's something that comes up a lot for men, that we actually don't really know what that is or how to what to do with that.
With the disgust energy, the there is a healthy and unhealthy element of our behaviors around it coming up. Healthy is like, we smell off, something like food that's a bit off, and it's like, oh, and that comes with the face. It comes with the that face. In its unhealthy form is when we treat people that way. We see something we don't like about a person, another person. And for most of us, we've experienced it from our mothers. And our fathers, but for me, it's been so much more about the mother's conditioning with the disgust element, because when it comes to discipline of children, discipline, for me, I sense, if I just broadly categorize it from an emotionally disciplining a child, has been through fear, through shame, and through disgust. And fear is that if we talk about our ability as children to be standing up for ourselves and telling and speaking our truth and knowing what we want, it comes from this fiery place, right? And fear is kind of like this gate that stops the fire in its tracks. And shame is like this water that waters the fire down. Disgust is like this separating, I'm not going to give you any love. So we feel isolated. We feel unloved. We're not seen. We're not heard. And it's like, you go stand in the corner there. I'm going to lock you away, or I'm not going to pay any attention to you because I'm disgusted by what you just did. And the very element that there is so little heart in that action of isolation, but it can be done for so many different things, you know, like around the dinner table. As kids, we might have dropped spaghetti on the ground, or our fork, or eating with our hands. And what happens is, so generally, our mothers will go, "Oh, don't do that. Oh, no."
That's a small level, right?
Small level, very small level of that disgust. It isolates us, so we feel.
And it's effective because we don't want to do it again.
It's super effective.
You know, as you were speaking, I had a strong memory come up, and I even a wave of sadness of when I was like 16 or 17. My parents were out of town, and I had a girlfriend over, and we had sex. And I had put the condom in the garbage can. And what happened was, while we were gone, our puppy took the condom out and put it on the floor, and there was like a mess on my mom's carpet. And I got home, and my mom had given me such a look of disgust. I didn't know what happened yet, that my whole body actually froze, and I got scared to like almost like all the blood in me dropped, like literally like drained out of me. And then it took her like an hour to even talk to me about it. She was so upset and so raging, and I had done everything right. Like, it didn't, I mean, I had a sex with a condom, it wasn't really a big deal, but her disgust of it, and in her house and all that, was way exaggerated, but it really penetrated me to the point where I felt sadness, and you naming it and having that memory come up, and the impact on me of like, I did something so bad, or so wrong.
And now it's linked with love.
Yeah.
Our ability to love and be loved. And it is, it's something that the collective feminine is working through, I know, as well. Is elements of shame and disgust that's very much trapped. And yeah, it is such a powerful disciplining and emotion, and it's used so often in relationships as well.
Yeah,
fortunately, as a tool of control. As men, the collective male have used violence as a form of control, being stronger than and physically overpowering women. And that's specifically gender, you know, a stereotypical gender-based type of analysis. The feminine, they don't have that physical strength in them, and the it's still, the aggression's still there. The aggression comes out with these sharp words, these penetrating words. They know exactly how to push our buttons, because they're pushing all of our buttons of, I'm gonna be so disgusted by you that I don't want to talk to you again. I'm not going to love you. I want to be with you. You're disgusting. And we feel like that rotten fruit. We feel like all of the things we've ever been disgusted by, we feel like poison. We feel like so unworthy, so unworthy, and so not seen. And that gets trapped.
Oh. Well said, and all right along that too is men's relationship with women's menses or smells, and ways that men will like smell their partner's yoni and they'll be bleeding or something and have like a, and to a point where that impression gets left in her body of not being acceptable or loved in the state she's in. So this could go pretty wide. These are really valuable one, because as we mature in our beings, we learn to accept a wider spectrum of everybody and everything, and have healthy disgust to that which is not safe to eat, or which is giving us feedback about something. And I love you discerning that it's not about people. Like disgust with somebody, like a person that's highly wounded and their body's decaying and they're going through that. Like imagine all the lepers in Hawaii that went through that, and other around the world for that matter, that would have bodily limbs decomposing, and the amount of people that would actually just be disgusted by them and scared and not love or not care. And then the few angels and saints and people that had a bigger capacity in their hearts to recognize that love was more valuable than self-preservation and disconnection, right? And which is ultimately out of fear. This is huge. This topic is really rich, and what it also says to me, Chris, is that the shadow is very big. What we call shadow work is basically a lot of the underdeveloped aspects in ourselves that keep showing up, and whether that is ways that we shut down rather than confront, ways that we withdraw rather than reach out and share what's happening for us authentically. And there's so many layers of this. And I think what you said earlier, as we meet ourselves with heart and acceptance and more patience, not softness like the feminine male who's like, I just love everything, but more this capacity to kind of hold our whole experience with a loving embrace and care and consciousness, we start to grow up and grow out of the childish behaviors which are on autopilot from our wounding. This is good. Yeah. And I don't know if you all could probably feel this. You can feel the maturation inside of Chris of like how he speaks into what's happening. There's a depth and a very easy way to understand and feel you and hear you and know where you're at and where you're speaking from. And this is a really important thing for me to highlight for the men that are watching this, is you're embodying what you're sharing, and you're so close to emotion. You're so close to being touched. That speaks a lot to the authenticity and realness, and not just the talking out of what you think you know, but talking out of the journey you've been on of discovery. I really honor you and appreciate you on that. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to share before we kind of wind this up?
I think it's just incredible that men have taken the courage to reflect, to do this type of work, because for so many it is an edge just to hear a man sharing with such a depth of it's like just to hear a man sharing some of their pains and their traumas, and just to sit with that can be such an edge for so many people. But it can bring such a great deal of acceptance to the collective male, because we have all been traumatized and traumatized others in so many different ways that so many of them are unspeakable. And it takes such courage to even accept that we have done these hurtful, shadowy things to others and had them done to us as well. And that courage and that bravery, I really super admire, both in myself, in you, and all men who are choosing to take this, I call like responsibility. It's like a mantle of responsibility. We're like, I see something's not quite there with me, and I want to change that. It's a courageous choice, very courageous choice. And you know, I just had a wish that there were people like you on my journey earlier on in the journey, because that would have made things even easier. With so much, it would have been still an unpleasant deep dive, but it would have given me some extra steps and pointers to be able to do it with more ease.
Yeah.
More ease. And I deeply admire the work that you're doing with the men, and to the men for standing up and saying, yes, I'm going to do this.
Thank you, Chris. And I agree. And I feel really fortunate. I've had some very good mentors in my life. And I'm happy to say that I'm doing my best to be one of those, to be a supportive catalyst, to have to speed the pace up and make it more of a supportive journey rather than a solo one doing our work. I can't say mine was entirely solo. However, I feel like there's this wonderful collective outgrowth of men stepping up and showing up. And I celebrate that. There's many great men doing good work. And it's awesome to be sharing it with you and be on this path, and with you men that are stepping up and showing up in your lives and being willing to do this work and explore and learn new skills and expand your capacity to show up for yourself and others more fully. This is a beautiful thing to be sharing. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it.